Hello, everybody, and welcome to Info Speaks. It's a webinar series brought to you by the UMSI Development and Alumni Relations Office, focused on important forward-looking topics in the information field. Hello, alumni, friends, and anybody else who's curious about automotive UX. I'm your host for the next hour, Jim Rampton, your moderator for what is going to be a pretty fun panel. I'm a lecturer here at the School of Information, and I'm lucky enough to teach undergraduate and graduate students both in automotive UX as well as in advanced interaction design. A little bit about me. I was actually a full-time lead product designer at General Motors, where I had the great honor of actually working with one of our panelists, Emily. And I worked on the latest generation of infotainment systems there. But today, we actually get to talk about some pretty fun stuff. I'm joined by three panelists who design and lead teams that are shaping the field of automotive mobility user experience and represent companies that I am sure you all have heard of. I will let each panelist introduce themselves and state what their favorite car, past or present is. And so on that note, I'm actually going to kick things off to Emily. So Emily, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Emily. I lead the user experience design teams at General Motors that create the digital experiences for our retail customers. And that's from the vehicle to the app to our web platforms. And depending on where you are in the world, you may be more familiar with our brands, which are Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac. And I have, the privilege to work across all of those brands in the work that we do. I'm an alum of UMSI, so I'm really excited to be here with the program and talk about this topic. I love it. And let's see, my favorite car. It's difficult for me to choose just one because I have many favorites, but I am really crushing on Buick right now.
Nice.
It's going through a design-driven resurgence. And so there's a lot of great vehicles there, but my favorite is probably the 1972 Buick Riviera.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a
good one. Mine is a 1987 Buick Grand National, so I'm there with you.
Right, that's my second one. That's second one.
Nice. There you go. Gabe.
I love
it.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Gabe, and I'm a senior product designer at May Mobility, which is an autonomous vehicle company based in Ann Arbor, also an alum of UMSI 2017. At May, I focus on designing internal AV tools that support operations and fleet management teams. And for my favorite car, it's a bit historical. I have always kind of had a thing for a category of cars. They're the Japanese K cars. They're these really small, simple, kind of minimalist design utility vehicles. So I think if I could, I would get myself the Honda Acti. It's a microvan. Kind of looks like a Volkswagen bus, but like half the size. I just think those have a lot of personality.
Minimalist design in automotive space. I love it. There you go. Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate it. All right. We'll end things with Zafar. Fire it away, Zafar.
Hey, everyone. I'm Zafar Razzacki. I'm a director at Ford Motor Company. I am part of the organization that helps to design and build our digital experience platforms, including infotainment and a lot of the digital experiences in and around the vehicle. Favorite car, I'm going to think back to when I first got my driver's license and the car that I wanted the most. It was the era of the Fast and the Furious. And I was in love with the design of the Mitsubishi Eclipse, in particular, the 1997 GSX. It had the big spoiler on the back. It had that beautiful sloping front. So I'll go with that.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. Oh, man. All right. I'm going to have to start rewatching those movies again because I think they're actually coming out with a new movie soon, too, again. So can't get enough of those. But great answer. Thank you so much, Zafar. Before we kick things off, I kind of want to give the audience a rundown as to how we're going to do things today. We have some great questions to kick off the discussion on both automotive UX as well as the introduction of AI and within our kind of ecosystem of design. Feel free at the very end to post questions. I'm going to politely cut off our panelists and remind them of the time. But don't worry, we are going to get to your questions. So please feel free to submit them throughout the conversation today. And I will do my best to make sure we have time at the end. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about AI and also the usage in this field. So Zafar, since you were the last one to introduce yourself, I'm going to leave the first question to you. How has AI partnered with UX within the automotive industry? Anything and everything that comes to mind. What do you think?
Well, AI is this indomitable force that we all have to reckon with. And I think it's really transforming two key areas that I think about. One is obviously the user experience itself, how our customer is going to benefit from AI. So I think that's one area where we need to dig into. And then the other is how we work. Our work streams and how we work as individuals and as teams. I'll actually start there first really quickly because I'm using it on a day-to-day basis to try to make my life easier. We've actually, and I'm sure this is true of many in the industry, a lot of companies are building their own internal LLM models that are helping us just accelerate the way we work internally. And we've done the same at Ford. I use a lot of our tooling to write briefs about projects that we're working on. I'll input sort of key parameters or considerations and have it kick out like a framework for a brief that I can then go in and fill in. Other things, even like team updates. My team will send me snippets of things that they've been working on throughout the week, and I'll just put that into something like a chat GPT and have that then synthesize an output that I can share out with my leadership, and it saves me a lot of kind of brain power and cognitive load. The last example I'll give is even just writing a job description.
Yes.
For anyone that's had to write a job description, it's actually quite tedious. And being able to leverage AI to look across our industry, think about what are the top most requirements or traits that we want in a candidate. How do you describe a certain job function? AI is another great tool to do that kind of work. So in terms of how we work, those are a couple of examples of ways that I am leveraging AI. And then certainly in terms of how it benefits our customers, I think the need for intelligence inside of the cabin and how a customer better understands what's happening inside of the vehicle or can better interface with it through conversational AI, simple natural language commands that can help do things like changing climate or change my navigation destination, etc. I think those are all things that we're all thinking about and are becoming more and more common in the experience inside the vehicle.
No, for sure. Emily, Gabe, care to add anything?
Yeah, I think Zafar really covered a lot there. I would just add, especially for those that aren't very close to the automotive industry right now, like the AI as like a body of technologies isn't new to the field. It's been in use in many ways over a long period of time, as it's developed and matured. So like anything from assisted and autonomous driving systems to mapping to manufacturing and motorsports and a lot of different technology developments. Those are all things that maybe in slight ways or that are going to impact the end user experience in some way. And so those technologies have had an influence on the things that we've been building for a long time. But the presentation layer of how they show up for customers, I really agree the conversational AI is probably where you're going to see that happen most first. That's not necessarily unique to automotive, but it does have a unique embodiment in the vehicle, I think. So, Gabe, what do you think?
I mean, when it comes to, I'll kind of circle back to the topic of how we use it as designers. I'll say quite transparently, I feel like I'm still very much studying the impact of AI among us as designers, how we're using it in our community, and experimenting with how to use it. I have used it to do some things like quickly generate like images for personas, things like that I can have a little more control over. I'm not spending the same amount of time to actually hand draw those things or source them from somewhere online where it kind of has that stock look. That's been fun. But I can definitely think of ways that it could be used to design better experiences as the technology continues to mature. And I think there are a lot of really interesting use cases there. I think a lot about some of the layer naming plugins for Figma that I think really have potential to kind of expedite some of the more mundane aspects of building a design system. I'll say I've had varying success with those, and I'm not sure that any one I've used so far is really feels like it's ready for prime time, but I have hope that it will be. I also think like some of the graphics applications, obviously they're so impressive and so realistic. Things like Sora, another one I've used, Kriya is really, really impressive. And when I look at those, I think about how many times as a designer, I've had a really complex or sort of hard to describe concept that I need to convey, and how time consuming it can be to storyboard that, for example. And just, I think like if I could get really good at really creative and really efficient with using some of those tools, how powerful it would be to just visually and even maybe auditorily kind of convey some of these more complex concepts.
No, that's for sure. And Gabe, thanks for mentioning kind of like the kind of how you like specifically work, within Figma and that kind of thing too, how you can use AI to create things like storyboards and that kind of thing. And that's really insightful. That was great. All right. So another question I wanted to kind of bring up is AR, VR, and XR. There's a ton of overlap with that and kind of the use of AI. And obviously within the automotive sector, we kind of use those tools a lot. So I do want to pivot a little bit to that topic. Question for you, Emily. Is it realistic to think AR devices like the Apple Vision Pro can be used to create a better driving experience?
Maybe. I don't think we know yet. Devices like the Vision Pro. I mean, the Vision Pro itself is very unique form factor and enables some new use cases, I think, that we're at the beginning of exploring. But the notion of using like AR technologies to develop for the vehicle, again, has been done for quite a long time. Different platforms and tech is used to help us understand and inform design choices as the design of the vehicle occurs over time. It's been used to help augment prototyping, both for putting things in context of a physical prototype when we may or may not have additional stimuli that can simulate the experiences we're going after. So I think the Vision Pro specifically is going to help enrich that and maybe get us to higher levels of fidelity or exploration of unique interaction modalities because of the new patterns it introduces. But using that in the way that we create driving experiences will be an evolution from what we've been doing for several years now, I think. So what do you think, Zafar?
Yeah, I think that's well stated. The Vision Pro is a piece of technology wonder, right? I mean, what Apple has been able to accomplish in that headset is phenomenal. I think we're still learning, and even just the set of capabilities that's being developed for it, it's still so early. But for it to be used as a collaboration tool, as a tool to visualize certain experiences, I completely agree. And if we zoom out a bit just on XR more broadly, Emily, I think you mentioned like AR isn't something foreign to automotive, right? Even if we just think about the heads-up display, which has existed for actually decades, there's going to be more and more that we can do and more experiences that we'll be able to enable as you have more cameras on the vehicle, you have more interesting interfaces. So I think AR is certainly something that will be a tool that we'll continue to use to improve the experience for drivers and even passengers, right? I mean, if we can dream for a minute with me, You know, I would love to see a future where we're all sitting in the cabin, no one has to drive, but we have AR interfaces where we can look around and see the outside world. And there are overlays of, hey, this is what you're looking at. This is its history. This is why it might be relevant to you. I think there's going to be a lot of exciting opportunity for us to play with AR and creating that type of connection between the people in the vehicle and the world around the vehicle. So still so early and a lot of development, both in the technology as well as how we experiment with different types of experiences.
Yeah, it's a pretty inspiring answer. I mean, I immediately think of like Minority Report or something, kind of those movies where you can kind of see things projected all around you, or like Blade Runner, where you get these screens floating around. I mean, it's very much, I feel like, very much in our peripheral at the moment, but it's coming more together. So Gabe, your work a lot with May Mobility has to do with autonomous driving. When it comes to the use of XR, extended reality, obviously you're not worried about the driver as much, just because it doesn't take the focus in an autonomous vehicle. What is the future of XR look like to you as you're kind of thinking about it?
Yeah. I think there are some use cases for that that I've thought of when I'm thinking about internal tooling and the people behind the scenes that are building the self-driving experiences. One thing that comes to mind is like simulation use cases are really, really important for autonomous vehicle companies. The ability to simulate, an infinite number of traffic scenarios that you can possibly just do on-road testing. And it's for the developers that are involved in that, it's a pretty detached experience, though. It's still very technical, very mathematical. So I mean, I think it would be cool if AR, XR, something like that could be used as kind of an add-on to the tools that those simulation engineers work on to not just measure and study the technical aspects of a traffic scenario, but actually sort of gain a point of view experience from the passenger. Like what would this scenario actually feel like if I were sitting in the vehicle and experiencing all of the things around me that are happening?
Sure. Does anything excite you about that idea? Like anything kind of inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's a lot when it comes to like, for example, like depth that you cannot get from just watching like sort of a bird's eye view of a vehicle on a map and sort of studying how it's moving through space. So getting a real like sort of hands-on sense of what that might actually feel like. I don't know about like, potentially like some of the haptic vibrations that could be brought into a developer's experience who's actually, using this type of software to simulate a traffic scenario. But I think overall, yeah, it could really kind of bring them closer to the end user's experience, which I think would just create, much more of a seamless experience as they're building those kinds of tools.
Gotcha. Well, thanks, Gabe. I appreciate you sharing that. So, all right, we're going to pivot a little bit because I can see some questions already happening in the world of kind of future mobility and autonomous vehicles. So I may insert some questions from the audience at this point. So autonomous vehicles and the future of mobility. For those of you guys who don't know, the team members here are basically shaping several of the cars that you're going to see in the future in the next 10 years. They have a direct impact in those designs. And so I want to kind of go back to, as we begin to think about autonomous vehicles, we're actually going to start with you, Zafar. When you think about autonomous vehicles, what are some of the impacts that UX is having on the interactions outside the vehicle? Like how we kind of, interact with vehicle to vehicle or kind of charging networks or anything that's kind of outside the vehicle?
Well, I'll speak to this from the perspective of when I joined Ford a couple of years ago. I actually joined the company to help lead the design and development of our autonomous vehicle programs, and a big focus for us was that vehicle to environment communication. How do you message intent of the vehicle to pedestrians, to people who are just around the vehicle and need to be aware of its behaviors. Just recently, within the past few months, I think Mercedes actually decided that they're going to use a new color indicator. And there is now a blue exterior lamp that they're adding to the vehicle to indicate when the vehicle is operating in sort of a semi-autonomously supported mode. And I think that was a huge step for the industry to say, you know, we're going to make a change to, I mean, how many years or decades has it been since anyone's considered sort of a different lighting pattern on the outside of the vehicle? So I think there is certainly that desire for us to say, hey, this robot is now being controlled by something other than a human, and let's make sure that it is able to communicate its intent. I think especially as you get into dense urban city centers where there are lots of potential interactions with many agents in the environment, that vehicle to exterior communication is going to be increasingly important.
I do want to kind of expand on that point because Hannah Stanton Gockel, so I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I had a great question that directly relates, Zafar, to something you were saying. How does pedestrian safety outside the vehicle inform UX design within the automotive space?
Well, I think it's exactly what we were just talking about, right? We have to consider all of those interactions between the vehicle and external agents. And that's pedestrians, certainly, as the vehicle is approaching an intersection. What are all of the potential interactions that the vehicle might have with people crossing the street or people adjacent to the vehicle? One problem state that we were actually exploring, and you know, Gabe, you may be able to speak to this more in detail than I, but curb interactions, right? When the vehicle is pulling up to the curb and the doors are opening and passengers are exiting and new passengers are entering, we called that PUDO, pick up, drop off, right? And PUDO is actually a pretty complex set of interactions. Yeah, it's a funny word, I know. But PUDO is a very complex set of interactions, right? That we have to design for and think about how is the vehicle communicating when it is slowing down, when it is coming to a stop, when the doors are opening, when pedestrians are or when passengers are exiting, when new passengers are boarding. All of those different interactions, there you have to help the outside world understand what's going on. So absolutely, it's an important thing that we have to design around, and that level of complexity is not to be taken for granted.
Emily, you're a massive team leader. Anything you want to add to that one?
No, I guess I would just reinforce, like, you know, part of what we have a responsibility to do is ensure not only like an optimal experience for users inside of the vehicle or interacting with the vehicle directly, but those that are outside in its periphery and in the ecosystem. I guess the only other thing I would add is that, you know, part of what makes autonomy exciting to me as a designer is that it changes the way in which we need to design, right? There's more considerations to be made, and those are going to vary depending on if we're talking about an autonomous vehicle used in a ride-hailing type of scenario, like what May Mobility is doing, or if you know, the eventuality of autonomy, more, you know, semi-autonomy, but also fully autonomous behavior as it relates to like a personally owned vehicle. Those are going to look a little bit different, but like the way that we approach the design needs to be much more comprehensive and end-to-end for the users involved in those scenarios than I think we have done in the past. And you know, and it is informing the way in which we're working. And I think is part of what makes the work that we do so exciting, right? It's much more, certainly much more complex, but also the, you know, the abstract thinking required to really dive into all the scenarios, like what Gabe was discussing for developers, right? You really have to be able to imagine things kind of in perpetuity of what could possibly be occurring in terms of like inputs and outputs for the user. So it leads to like maybe some development of new methods and new approaches to the way we design.
So you guys, I was taking some notes as you guys were chatting. I did want to kind of, before I asked kind of a question for Gabe real quick, I did want to kind of elaborate on something you and Zafar just kind of elaborated on, which was that UX designers are kind of taking more of a role in kind of in different parts of the vehicle experience, not just what we consider a digital one. So just to confirm then, you see UX designers not only shaping the screens inside the vehicle, but any kind of communication that happens outside of it, how we open the doors or how we interact with the controls, how it communicates with the world around us, not just the traditional digital screen interface that we're used to interacting with. Did I understand that correctly?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we had huge teams reimagining the entire service journey from end to end, right? And just think about simply like vehicle access. The idea of a key in my pocket or my phone just being the way I unlock the car is different from hailing the vehicle, having to interact with an app, making sure that that vehicle that arrives there is your vehicle. Right there, this is now a fleet of autonomous vehicles out there in the world. How do I make sure that the one that's pulling up is the one I'm supposed to get into? So it really requires us to rethink that full journey end to end, and then create different paradigms and different systems to address those.
Awesome. No, thanks, Zephyr. All right, Gabe, I'm gonna put you on the spot. How might, or I guess, what role do UX designers play in designing autonomous vehicles? So any specifics we would love to hear.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of respond.
Well, please, if you want to respond, go for it. Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of respond to that. I mean, that question, but in the context of interactions that are taking place outside the vehicle, because I think there's actually a really interesting topic there that's maybe not talked about as often or even commonly known about. But in the AV space and like especially AV ride hailing companies, all of these companies use remote tooling to have teams of operations staff that are kind of remotely monitoring the vehicles. There's kind of two parts to this. There's operations software that's like fleet management, really meant for more like customer service use cases. But another one that I work on specifically and I'm really interested in is remote guidance software for AV transportation. And the people who use this software, they're trained remote personnel that monitor vehicles and they receive information about what each vehicle is doing, and they can provide a certain degree of human input to keep the vehicle operating in autonomy. So as a designer, this is a really interesting space to work in because it's not your typical use case, right? It's not about designing for commercial end users. It's much more centered around understanding what a complex piece of technology is doing and when it doesn't work as expected. And also making that information available to the user so that they can take action. It's also really interesting because, again, this is taking place off-site, outside of the vehicle. But the result of this has very real impact on the passenger's ride feel inside the vehicle. Sometimes it can be 100% seamless. Other times it might be a little bit noticeable. So there's design considerations that teams that are focusing on the in-cabin rider experience need to make about how to handle that. How transparent are they about what's going on sort of behind the scenes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gabe. Would you mind talking a little bit more specifically kind of about what just a lead product designer actually designs in an autonomous vehicle? I think it's safe to assume we got probably some listeners or viewers thinking, wait, there's no driver. What do you like? What is there to design? And I think that so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Zephyr hit it quite squarely. Like it really is a lot about. I think it kind of ventures into service design. Really, like it's thinking about like that end-to-end process. That's very different from your typical driving experience, right? Like requesting a trip, getting into the vehicle. Once you get into the vehicle, I think that's very interesting too. And there's a lot of focus kind of put on first-time user experience because it's so novel. So somebody who's using this for the very first time, they really don't know what to expect. And in my experience doing research, there's definitely, issues with trust and some trepidation, but there's from my experience, more willingness to actually trial this than I would have thought. But then I think that really does sort of place the responsibility on us to think about things like, how do you personalize this experience? How do you greet the passenger? How are you cueing them about their trip? All sort of like the navigation trip details that come up, especially if you're doing things like ride sharing, which comes up that can become very complex. And again, kind of what I mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of decision making that goes into how transparent you are with the passenger about what's actually happening. If you've been in a fully driverless autonomous vehicle, it's there's times when it stops unexpectedly, and there's a decision point. Like, are we going to explain to someone what's going on? And sometimes what's going on is very complicated, right? So how do you sort of distill that and make it meaningful to them and also not scary?
Can I add to what Gabe just said?
Yeah,
Because,
go ahead.
when I was doing this work, we would think a lot about the analogy to like a human-driven vehicle. If you get into a taxi or you're in an Uber or Lyft, we've all been in good rides like that, where the driver knows how to interact well with you, they know how to inform you, they control the vehicle well, and you enjoy that experience with them. We've also been in bad rides, right, where they don't drive well, they don't respect your communication preferences, the car might not be clean. So a lot of those considerations that you have in the interaction between the passenger and that driver and the passenger in that vehicle, now you actually have to design those interactions into the product itself. And just like Gabe was saying, when the vehicle has to make a decision, what of that are you being transparent about to the passenger? How do you allow the passenger to have control over the comfort settings in the car? How do you let them have control over audio or video? So there are all of these little interactions that you need to think about as part of the end-to-end experience. And we would use often that driver analogy as, how do we ensure that when we're pulling a human driver out, we're replacing it with the right technology to give that sense of comfort and communication and trust that a driver would expect.
Can I pile on too?
Of course, please do.
I think we've been focusing a lot on the ride hailing scenario for autonomy, and there's a lot of progress in that area, absolutely. But when we talk about a product design role related to autonomy and automotive, there's also the semi-autonomous systems that are rapidly improving across a whole host of different brands. And that work, while it shares themes with how we need to approach whether it's building trust and the feedback loop that's required between the user and the vehicle, there's also really unique circumstances that a designer is going to help to optimize. Handoff being probably the most risky point between a human driver behind the wheel directly and the automated system that might be, helping propel that vehicle down forward, right? Because we're facilitating a transition between how the vehicle is behaving that can introduce some conflict between the mental model that a driver may have and the one that's required when an ADAS system is active, right? And those are some really unique user experience problems, I think, because we really have to tap into the cognitive limitations of human beings and design around those in order to really optimize the experience. So it's kind of on a different scale, but so much exciting things in this space.
I'm going to warn the panelists. I'm going to start inserting more questions because we're getting flooded at the bottom with more and more questions. So and whenever they become applicable, I'm going to kind of just fire away. One of them actually came from some Heath Mitra, and they're asking, how do you design experiences for those of us who enjoy driving? So kind of, Emily, would you mind kind of answering that? Because I think it's pretty safe to say we still got a lot of customers who just enjoy driving a car.
Yeah. I'm one of them. Yeah, I love driving, and I love driving all different kinds of vehicles. I'd say at the core of it, we want to start, and this may be core to how user experience designers approach work, but we're certainly not the only ones who participate in this kind of thing, or are driven by it, which is really understanding the context of use and the unique conditions that that a driver may want to experience with a given type of vehicle, right? So like your daily driver may have different capabilities, but also need to serve different needs than a performance vehicle might, versus a truck or a commercial vehicle or something you're going to take off-roading, right? And so we build a very wide range of vehicles across all of our different brands, and they all have very different capabilities and characteristics. And usually where we start is really understanding that context of use, and it's about building empathy for the user, and also working very, very closely with engineers, industrial designers, a whole wide range of other types of disciplines to uncover, how can we push forward the technology, the actual automotive technology of what that vehicle can do, and translate that into interfaces that are, first and foremost, like safe for the operator to understand in the moment, which could be at very high rate of speed. It could be, in an off-road condition. So again, it's introducing a ton of variation in the context of use that we have to think, very both very specifically and also very broadly about how those are codified into interactions that that are easy for people to understand and develop muscle memory around, right? So again, starts with really putting ourselves in the shoes of the user or the customer, and working cross-functionally to develop these experiences, because both the technology, the interface, the customer needs and feedback all kind of interplay to inform the choices that we make in developing those types of vehicles.
Thanks, Emily. And I have to admit, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask Zafar the same question, because one of the benefits of this panel is I get to ask two different, colleagues about kind of competing products about the performance sector. And so, Zafar, I know your team gets to work with the Mustang team as well. So I have to ask you the same question, like, how do you guys design experiences for those customers that just truly enjoy driving cars?
I can't disagree with Emily that it really starts with the knowing your customer at the core, and really trying to understand their preferences, their use cases, and ensuring that that's at the heart of the design process. I think you will always have this segment of customers that love to drive, and designing a performance vehicle for that customer is important, but also giving them choice. And that's why I think, we at Ford are focusing on trying to scale Blue Cruise across our portfolio, and giving customers, whether they are driving a performance vehicle or a truck, they're going off-roading, when they want that hands-on, lean-in type of experience, it's there for them. They will love it. But when they are stuck in traffic on their way to work, and they are still waking up and having their cup of coffee, they can.
We're looking at the new Detroit sign in I-94. Yep.
Oh God,
that's a separate debate altogether. But that there is technology that they can trust and fall back on to get them there safely, So I think it's really about giving the customer choice and making sure that we're designing for both that lean in use case and that lean back use case inside of the vehicle.
Thank you very much, Zafar. I appreciate that. Gabe, I want to ask you a similar question because I know that May Mobility specializes in a certain type of customer. And so I was wondering, Gabe, if you don't mind answering one of the submissions of the questions from Hannah Stanton Gockett, that and they ask, can you expand on in-vehicle accessibility and modifications that companies make to vehicles that can perhaps more easily implement because they're not the driver?
Yeah. I mean, accessibility in a wide range of abilities is, I think, kind of a core guarantee of where autonomous ride hailing is going. There's definitely, I mean, there's more commonly things like wheelchair accessible vehicles. That is something that May Mobility offers. Where it begins to get a little bit more complicated, and I don't know of a company that's quite there yet, although I know there's a lot of research and development in this space, is automated wheelchair fastening systems. I know that UMTRI at U of M is doing some work with this.
It's the Michigan Transportation and Research Institute, for those who don't know. Go ahead, sorry, Gabe.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's really, really important because there is still sort of some limitations where passengers that use mobility devices, whether they're wheelchairs or otherwise, they still rely heavily on accompaniment, right? They have caretakers with them or a family member with them, and that can be fine. But there's people that we've encountered that have never ridden in a vehicle by themselves, and that's kind of astounding to think about, right? And I think if the more we can kind of develop automated systems like that, we can really increase the independence that so many people want and need. Also, I think kind of circling back to what we were talking earlier about, like Gen AI and conversational interfaces, I think that there's also a lot of promise there when it comes to first-time user orientation and onboarding. I got to use one of those automated wheelchair fastening systems, and it required a lot of instruction. Like, it took me, there's a period of learning how to use that. And I just can't help but think how much more seamless it would be if the vehicle, or something inside of the vehicle could just tell me how it works. And if I'm having trouble, I could just ask it for help, and how that might really improve the experience.
Gotcha. Thanks, Gabe. I guess really quickly, because I want to make sure I address more of the questions coming in. Emily or Zafar, I guess we can start with you. What are some ways the UX designers kind of make a point to understand and design around accessibility?
Well, I think being intentional about studying the area first and foremost. And, there are some areas of the digital ecosystem where we're really quite mature in terms of what, how we make accommodations for people that have a different, different way of interacting with the world. The web, for example, there's a vast wealth of knowledge of what we can use in terms of like how assistive technologies are built into experiences there. And there is some relevance to that work to also within both, in mobile and in the vehicle itself. I think we're going to see that really evolve over the next several years. The autonomy, in the case of autonomy, and opening up the doors to a much wider range of people to move independently is going to accelerate that, to be sure. I think, maybe this is a cop-out answer, maybe, but I think it goes back to empathy, right? And like just designing with those communities, right? So going back and taking the time to understand the experiences of people with different levels of abilities, and what are ways, unique and creative ways that we can make accommodations or introduce assistive technology to improve the experience they're going to have in the vehicle, right? And so I think it's absolutely something that should be part of any designer's skill set, at least to some degree. But it's going to require some effort because it's not always kind of a core part of the, curriculums that people, develop as they become designers in their career. So I don't know, Zafar, what do you think?
Honestly, I mean, I think Gabe and Emily both covered it really well. And Emily, your point of intentionality and empathy, right? If you can have those two things, and then going and immersing yourself with that customer segment, as an example, as part of designing autonomous vehicles, went and spent time with the aging community, and there are many organizations that advocate for those or that demographic. We spent time with them. We asked what their attitudes were towards autonomous vehicles. What are their mobility needs? What are challenges that they face? And it all really comes back to, the intent and caring. And then you start to understand through digital modalities and physical modalities, what are the things that we need to do to ensure that we're accommodating for those customers. So I feel like I'm just repeating what Gabe and Emily already said, but it's so true. You just put in the care and put in the effort and go do the research and start prototyping with them. I love the idea of building with them. Co-creation with those communities is really powerful.
Yeah. And more, everybody benefits too, is something else to consider, right? Because it unlocks accommodations that can serve a wide range of people, that may have not have been the genesis of a new way of interacting with the vehicle, but can serve other kinds of scenarios that that we may not have thought of.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah. Intelligence and intention, and then obviously designing with empathy in mind. No, thanks. Thank you guys very much. So I'm going to pivot real quick to the future of the industry, and then we're going to go more into some live questions that are kind of coming in. Zafar, we'll start with you on this question. Then I'm going to pivot to Emily and Gabe. So the ecosystem around the vehicle is growing, and more tech companies are having more influence in the user experience. Companies specifically like Google and Apple. What role do you see those two companies playing in the in-vehicle space?
Well, I think the impact that they've already had on the industry is huge. With the introduction of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay back in 2015, 2016, they've really changed the paradigm of what customers expect in terms of the digital experience, the UX, the UI inside of the car. So I think they've really done a lot to help accelerate the transformation of the HMI and infotainment systems inside of the vehicle. The reality is, as our vehicles become more connected and more digital in nature, the lines between our digital lives and our digital ecosystems and these cars are going to blur. And even more so as autonomy increases, right? And my responsibility as a driver goes down, but now this is just a third space that I'm spending time in getting from point A to point B. My expectations of digital capabilities and all of these different use cases inside of the car is going to be higher than ever. So I think our ability to think about productivity, entertainment, even the idea of, how do I comfortably sleep inside of the car? These are all things that we're going to have to design for in the future. And that digital ecosystem is going to be really key, right? How do I access my contacts, my messaging and communication, my media? A lot of the same things that we might be thinking about sitting at our desk in the office or sitting on my couch in my family room. How do I pipe a lot of that same data and those same experiences into the vehicle? Those are all things that are going to need to be top of mind, and that I know we're all starting to design towards today.
Emily, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, in many parts of the world, your digital life, the thing that is the most central to you in your life is your phone, right? And the digital ecosystem, plural systems, that you are bought into, are going to require that seamless integration with the vehicle as another node, in that ecosystem. And so, you'll in the industry today, like there's already strong partnerships between Google and Apple that exist with a lot of other OEMs. We certainly have a strong partnership with Google, and we're always exploring ways to kind of build on each other's capabilities to really push forward that seamlessness and that synergy between those two devices, because that free flow of data and personalized information is going to be the expectation for any product, and automotive is no different, right? So,
Gotcha. Gabe, kind of same question to you, but I'm sure it's probably framed a little bit differently. How is May Mobility and other autonomous companies, in your opinion, kind of using kind of the influence of Apple and Google when designing those experiences?
Yeah, well, I would like to speak about Apple and Google. I won't speak specifically to how May Mobility is interacting with those companies, but I mean, when it comes to Apple and Google and automotive, first I'll say I'm sad to have seen the Apple Car project sunsetted. That's a bummer. But I do want to say I'm really impressed with how Google via Waymo has partnered so closely with their OEM. I think they're using Jaguar I-Paces now.
And they're yeah, I see a couple of them in Ann Arbor all the time too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, really? Wow. Yeah, I've ridden in those in Phoenix, and I mean, to Zafar's point earlier, like that blurs the line even more, I think, between our physical and digital spaces. I'd say it unifies it a lot more. And in my experience in those vehicles, it really allows Google to have so much more like I want to say like curatorial control over what that in-vehicle experience looks and feels like.
Nice. Well, we are getting a flurry of questions, and so I do want to make sure I respect the viewers on here. And so I'm going to do a kind of a quick kind of rapid fire, if you will. So try to keep your answers to about a minute, if you guys don't mind. So first one's up is from actually one of my students, Jess Cummings. Emily, I think you might be the best one to answer this question. Since autonomy changes the way you think for design, what ethical considerations are different from self-autonomous vehicles versus drivers not using self-driving cars? So what ethical considerations are important to keep in mind when designing those interfaces?
Well, the things that come top of mind for me are always going to be trust in how that's displayed on between the vehicle and interacted with between the vehicle and the operator. It could also be something as abstract as what information is being shared between the two, as well as kind of clarity between what the vehicle, like as an agent, what choices that agent is going to make on behalf of the user. And so making sure that there's transparency to those things, and that's part of the considerations for the interface is, I think some of those are ethical decisions to be sure. We talked before about safety and how much that's like a significant consideration in designing autonomous systems. But especially as, the use of AI and things kind of influence how these things are developed, I'm sure new questions and conundrums are going to be introduced that are unique to the driving scenarios or like the vehicle environment, and that's certainly something we want to keep top of mind as we go.
Gabe, one of the questions actually that I had for you, kind of getting back to the same issue, is you kind of alluded to this too in one of your earlier answers a couple questions ago. Do you notify drivers in an autonomous vehicle if something's wrong with the car, but you can keep driving potentially?
Do we notify other road users?
Like you have your tire's getting low. Do you tell the user?
Yeah. We have so not via the interface, but we do. So I mean, we have a really robust system of like receiving signals from the vehicle that gets put on to customer service. So we have ways of alerting them. And in my experience, like both in our vehicles and in Waymo's vehicles, there still is like a pretty heavy-handed human in the loop aspect to the experience. So if any, like we stalled in a Waymo vehicle just in the middle of downtown Phoenix, and
Oh, really?
yeah, there was no and there was nothing on the screen to say, you know, we're stalling for this reason, but there was an immediate customer service representative that came on and was able to get us going again. So that's kind of how I think about that.
You notice you're stranded. Would you like some help? Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. All right. So, Zafar, here's a good one for you. How do you stay current with concepts and trends in mobility UX design? And that question is from David Sykes.
I think no matter what domain you're in, right? Constantly being curious and learning is so important to growth as a practitioner, and even more important as a leader. Yeah, I have a number of resources that I tap into. There are newsletters. One of them comes out of.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you got any names? You got any quick? Yeah.
Well, I will name drop a friend to many of us, Riley Brennan. Riley maintains a newsletter called The Future of Transportation, where he talks a lot about different trends and movements within mobility and the startup ecosystem. So definitely sign up for Riley's newsletter. I also just use a lot of like Google alerts and things to follow trends around autonomy, around EVs, what's happening with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. So there are lots of these types of tools that I think are really useful for us to keep track of the day-to-day happenings in our industry. And I always try to allocate a little bit of time every morning just to scan those things and make sure that I'm up to date.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. So we have a couple minutes left, and this is kind of I'm summarizing kind of a couple questions I saw at the end, but what do you see this area expanding over the next 5 years and the opportunity for employment and the opportunity to be a part of this world? Do you see this expanding, contracting? If you guys could each kind of see your vision for the future, if you will, about the future growth of the automotive UX and mobility industry.
I'm happy to jump in first.
Yeah, please go ahead, Zafar.
Go for it.
I think we are just at like the bleeding edge of this domain. I think we're all fortunate to have been thinking about this for a little while, but there's so much changing, right, in terms of technology inside of the vehicle, levels of autonomy, that interface between the vehicle and our digital ecosystems. It's the very early days of this now. We're going to see more need for UX design, for service design, many of these different disciplines becoming part of the core design process of how we design and build our vehicles. So yeah, I absolutely think that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll have whole departments just focused on the digital experience in and around the vehicle. And I think the job for leaders like Emily, building these teams, managing these teams, it's going to become a lot harder, but a lot more fun.
Totally agree. I think the only other thing I would say to that is what it is hard to predict very specifically is how the skills required or how the specific practice and methods are going to evolve over time, right? Particularly as new tools get introduced. We led off with AI. That's a big one, certainly. And how that influences the way in which we work. I'm a big fan of really cross-disciplinary creation. I think that's how we get the best. That's how we get the best output. But I know that user experience design is going to be a big component of what's required to be successful in the future, just with the ubiquity of software and digital interactions that are going to permeate the automotive industry. So lots of opportunity ahead.
Sweet. Thank you, Emily. Gabe, what
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I certainly think that we're needed in this space as it continues to evolve. So I really do think there's a lot of opportunity. I think many of the things that Zafar and Emily just talked about touch on those things. We also, we talk so much about some of the partnerships that come out of these or that are kind of emerging in these spaces. And we talked a little bit about like curbside interactions, but one thing we didn't talk as much about was the infrastructure, I guess, of where vehicles operate. And I think there's a lot of design considerations to be had there that I haven't seen as much. I know there's some companies out there doing some things with that, but yeah, I think there's a lot of room still to explore. And I think I want to plus one Emily's comment about I don't really know, I think that our skill sets are going to need to evolve. I think we're seeing that, and we don't necessarily know exactly
Technical and non-technical, like technical and non-technical skills? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the final question for this afternoon, and we'll kind of go each one at a time. What experience and skills should an experienced UX professional emphasize if they're looking to get involved within the automotive and mobility UX space? And then Gabe, we'll start with you.
Okay. I guess, kind of riffing off the idea of our skills are going to need to evolve. I think we need to show a serious appetite for curiosity and experimentation. I think at the same time, it's really, good to continue to emphasize some of the more historical legacy skills that are tried and true within UX design, and to really become masterful at those across research and some of the more technical aspects of building experiences. But I'm really excited and a little bit nervous maybe to see where the field goes and what kinds of skills we're going to need to bring to the table. But ultimately, I think it's very exciting.
Sweet. Emily, what about you?
Yeah, again, hard to predict how technical skills are going to evolve. The space is so broad though that really any mix of design skill is going to find applicability to the field in some way. But so I think about it more so like is either as experiences or just like general approach. People who are good abstract and systems thinkers are going to be the most successful in the automotive industry. Certainly experience designing, products or services that cross devices or cross channels and really have experience with that orchestration element. That is very much a focus in what we do. Really adaptive people, people with comfort with ambiguity and really
Sure.
generating ideas and novel approaches to complex problems, right? Like that is what this work is all about in this space. So I'd say that, and then finally, it's a field that is very much going through a massive transformation, and that is never clean. And it's often messy and confusing, but it's exciting. And so I think you really have to have an open-mindedness and a passion for the work and for solving these kinds of problems to be successful. And if that sounds like you, let me know. I've got opportunities.
Thanks, Emily. Zafar, well, you get the last word. What do you think?
Well, I think in terms of the technical skill set, having that curiosity to experiment and play with new tools. We've talked a lot about AI, obviously, like how comfortable are you going and diving in and looking at generative AI and trying to understand it as a technology and how it might benefit you. I always look for people that have that appetite to go experiment and play and prototype with things. So I think that's critical. But that wedded with some of the core empathy and ability to go deep and understand your user through research. So I would love to see, and I think we're going to continue to look for that combination of technical fluency and deep empathy and research skill set.
So Zafar, Emily, Gabe, thank you all very, very much for participating in this panel discussion. I'm excited to say that we're going to do more of these, and so hopefully we get a chance to see you back. On that note, thank you also for the audience members who are listening to this. Thank you to the University of Michigan School of Information Career Development Office for sponsoring this. And I want to wish everybody a wonderful, happy Friday. So thank you again. And then lastly, go blue. Thank you guys all very, very much again.
Go blue.
Go blue.